Hi, Merlin. My name's Dean Besserer. I'm the VP Exploration for Freeman Gold Corp, and we have our highly prospective gold property in Idaho called the Lemhi Gold property.
Dean, thanks for the introduction. Good to meet you. It's the first time we've met, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Thanks for having me.
I think next time, well, hopefully we'll meet up in person. PDAC has been bumped to June. I'm not sure if I'll make it to that, but I'll probably go to Beaver Creek. Are you going to be there?
We are planning to be there. Yes, thank you.
Right. Well, this is a relatively new story for me. I mean, you haven't been listed long, have you? A couple of years.
That's right.
And it was very interesting. You know, I went through the presentation. I've been through some of your news releases. How did you pronounce it? Lemhi or Lemhi?
Lemhi, yeah.
Lemhi, the Lemhi Gold Project.
That's right.
You put out a resource last year. It's about 1 million ounces, 750,000 ounces in the indicated category and 1 million ounces in the inferred category. But it doesn't really talk about the geology or the oxidation profile. Could you, and then there was kind of some stuff about some high grade stack lenses. You know, there's lots of information there, which kind of led me on in a rather kind of tantalizing way, but didn't really tell me what we're dealing with. So could you just kind of give me some orientation of kind of the geology and what we're looking at in terms of what's inside that resource?
Sure. Well, I can back up a little bit. Our team identified this project that was sitting in a private company back in about 2016, and we were fortunate enough to get it in 2019 in a bid process. And we had reviewed the data and looked at this and knew that it was fit the mold for what we were looking for an advanced project that we could quickly add ounces and get into development. So, and it also had a very key component to it in that it had a core of patented mining claims, which are rare these days, and those are much easier to work on, much easier for permitting. So it ticked a lot of our boxes with respect to what we were looking for in the project. Then we were, because not many people knew about this, we actually reverse engineered it, where we acquired all the ground around this before we actually got the patents. And that led us to have a large consolidated land package at Lemhi. That it was something that nobody had done in the past. Nobody had, this thing sat in some mid-tier companies back in the 80s. They were particularly AMC, and they were going to mine this after Bear Track, which is now Revival Gold's project. And so we knew that it was a great project. And we knew that not many people knew about it because it had been inactive for so long. So
hang on, what's the distance to Bear Track, Arnett? So what are you talking physically?
Just over 20 miles, something like that, as the bear crawls or as the crow flies.
The quite a lot of the news talks about, you did a 7,500 meter kind of re-drilling program of old resources. You said that was drilled in the 80s, but wasn't the last drilling done in 2012, and that kind of at the end of that bear market? Or the
That's right. So the mid-tiers had this project through the 80s and the 90s, and like I said, they had this ready to go. They were planning to mine this when they were done at Bear Track, and then of course all the things that happened in the market happened, and it was tumultuous times. And then this thing eventually ended up in a private co. That private co did some work in 2012, and they did a joint venture with Northern Vertex. Well, at the time, so Northern Vertex spent about $7 million, but at the time they were putting their Moss Mine into production. So only owning 50% of this asset was a bit of a distraction for them, and they were low on cash. So they got an offer from the underlying property owner, who was a private company, to pay back all their exploration expenditures and a whole bunch of cash. So they did that deal because that was basically a non-dilutive financing for them, and off they went. And then it sat there in that private co until we were able to acquire it.
And have you been involved right from the start? So you've worked with Will. You're part of a team that's been together for a number of years, a number of projects. That's
right. I wasn't involved with, obviously we have a bit of a great management and board right now with Paul Matisic just coming on, and Will Freeman who, and Bassam Mubarak, who have all been involved with a number of companies that have either gone through to production or have been taken over. So these guys, for them to come on is a testament to this asset in itself, because these guys just don't get involved with any project. I mean, I can tell you that Paul put us through the ringer before he came on board. So
okay, so let's talk about the asset then. So what are we looking at in terms of geology here?
The geology is fairly simplistic in that the ore deposit's hosted in a series of metasediments, so quartzites and siltites. The mineralization is not really preferential to either one of those. In the stratigraphy, really what it is we call it an intrusion-related deposit. So on the west flanks of the gold deposit, there's a granitic intrusion, and that's obviously the heat source for the plumbing system for this deposit. And then there are a bunch of low angle faults and structures, shears and faults that come off of that and coalesce and concentrate the mineralization. So if you looked at a mag map, for example, you can really see that Lemhi as X marks the spot. It's at the coalescence of two major structures, but also we know from drilling and understanding this that there are a bunch of minor structures. And like a lot of these things that have been around since the 80s and 90s in the US, back then they only did RC drilling. So they really, they drilled to specific depth. They didn't really understand the geology that much because they were really looking for low-hanging fruit. Oxide gold deposit, they were going to take out the open pit portion of this and move on. So, obviously we saw a lot of potential in that. And I think we can get back to that because that was one of your questions earlier about oxidation levels and geology, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, it's you talk about an oxide deposit, and you've got a million ounces, and the grade seems to be relatively consistent at around 1 gram a ton, and yet that's in the resource. That's kind of the existing resource. But I know that you've been drilling at the Beauty Zone, and you've got some high grade material there, or high grade potential. But let's just focusing on that initial resource. 1 million ounces. It seems to be, as you say, kind of relatively low-angled structures or sediments hosted. Are there no sulfides, or is it all oxidized down? I mean, what's the?
Our oxidation levels really vary between 150 and 200 meters. But that being said, when you get out of the oxidation, it's difficult to determine the oxidation from the alteration. Basically, when you're in the ore zone, the rocks are obliterated. And fortunately for us, something that we know now is that whether you're in, if we wanted to call it, say, transition ore or sulfide ore at depth, which it's a very low sulfidation system to begin with, so we never see great concentrations of sulfides. But that being said, we do get some sulfide at depth, and whether you want to call it oxide, transition, or sulfide, it really reacts the same with respect to metallurgy. So it's not really an issue for us with respect to that.
So even if it goes beyond the pure oxide layer, it's still something that's going to be able to work on a heap leach pad.
Yeah, heap leach, but really most of our studies have shown that we're probably moving towards a CIL situation, a vat leach process, and you sort of touched on an important factor that, how I like to describe this deposit is a series of high grade lenses sitting in a lower grade envelope. So it does bulk out at 1 gram per ton, but as we do more core drilling and get to understand this deposit, and what we can see in the block models as well, is that these low angle structures that hold the mineralization, they link up from section to section, and we can really tie together some very high grade zones within that 1 gram deposit, and you could see some of the historic grades are, in excess of 10 grams over distance. So it's exciting that way. And I think you'll see that in our next update to our mineral resource that we will break out those high grade zones as well, to show people that the payback on this thing can be quite fast because it's near surface. It's the metallurgy is good, and there are some high grade zones that we could get through the mill quite quickly.
So you pay off the capex with a high grade material, and then you just blend the rest.
That's right. And we've looked at it. It's early days for us, but we have looked at a number of scenarios with with heap leach, vat leach, and a combination where we would vat leach and then have the lower grade material report to a low grade heap leach pile. So a number of different things that we've looked at, but it's still early days on that front.
And was the determining factor the amount of high grade material? So it'd be the gold you'd lose if you went for a lower recovery process. Was that the kind of the determining factor?
Yeah, that's right. And right now our initial heap leach numbers that are in our 43-101 report were somewhere just over 70%, which is decent. And our CIL numbers were in excess of 90%, up to 98%. As well, because there's a lot of coarse gold in the system, we can scalp that off on a gravity on the front end of that process, and we get a very clean concentrate. So it's really the metallurgy is very, very good.
Great. Do you have a map that can kind of I could orientate myself around in terms of where the resource is and where the drill meters are going in the next 12 months or so, or the forthcoming campaign? There we go. Okay, so just on that one, there's some great results. But that 150 meters at 151 meters at 2.5 grams. That's an eye-popping intersection.
Right, and as I spoke to earlier, you can see there within that you get that 8.7 meters of 25 grams. That's what we're talking about when we talk about these high-grade lenses, and that they're not a one-hit wonder. They continue. They're obviously not always at that spectacular grade, but they continue. You're able to join them up from section to section, which is spectacular. So to be conservative, we wanted to treat this as a larger lower grade deposit, but we really do know that there are these high grade lenses in there.
And on that diagram there, you've got the kind of almost the white outline in a very detailed contour. What is that outline?
So that's the resource outline. So that's the outline of all of the drilling that was used in the current resource. That's that 749,000 ounces at 1.02 grams indicated and 250,000 ounces inferred. And then obviously, these resources today have to have a pit shell around them. So the pit shell's slightly bigger than that. And that's the resource shell. And then the pit shell will be slightly bigger than that. And that's shown on another diagram here.
Okay. I wondered whether your resource figure was, your cutoff grade was specifically chosen to be a nice round number, almost 750 and 250,000 ounces, because, a half a gram cutoff is quite high, isn't it? I mean, you could go lower than that and you'd get a...
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it was at 1550 gold. So we wanted to be conservative in our numbers to, not understanding we're in tumultuous times with respect to the market and global economies and COVID, et cetera. So we wanted to make sure we had some wiggle room to show that this really is robust, because if we drop this cutoff down, there's quite a few more ounces. Yeah.
Well, it depends. If you can isolate enough high grade material to pay off your capex and give you kind of a blended production profile, if you can schedule it in the mine schedule, and you can make the low grade material pay, then all good. But
that's right, and that's why things like the beauty zone, which we talk about in some recent news releases, is so important because it's a very high grade zone on surface. We've put 3 holes into that for initial testing, and visually they look great, but until the assays come in, we won't know how that shakes out. But something like this, where you have multi-ounce material over width, could certainly add those high grade ounces really quickly and be a very quick payback on this on the mill.
Okay, so what are we looking at here? What, is this where you're going to be drilling? The red dots, are those the resource expansion drilling that you're planning at the moment now that you're financed?
That's right. So this is only the phase 1 drilling. So before we did our second round of financing last year, or early this year, sorry, we had selected these drill holes, and now, of course, with in excess of 20 million in the bank, we're going to do quite a comprehensive program with up to 10,000 meters and leading into our PEA. We're going to quickly move it in that direction. So, but yes, this was the initial drill holes that were planned, and I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but yes, these ones, and these ones are already done. So we haven't done the ones in the south and these ones in the middle, but we're actively drilling these three, and the beauty zone targets were done before Christmas.
And those are the 3 holes that you said that you haven't got the assays back for, but the core looks tasty. That's right.
I mean, it looks similar to what we see on surface on the hanging wall side of the fault when we drilled it. So we're optimistically excited.
So at the beauty zone, the grades that I see in the presentation, multi-ounce, up to 450, and you had a good number above 10 grams a ton.
That's right.
Those are all from rock chip samples, new grab samples?
Yes.
So haven't got, and you've put 3 holes in, and you can see the core, but you haven't got the assays back, and that's the first drilling in the beauty zone.
That's right.
And it was completely untested beforehand.
Yeah, and I think because it's fairly steep there, so it has a number of interesting things going for it. The beauty zone, I think it wasn't tested because it was steep, and it had been hydraulically mined there. So as you can imagine, you're only hydraulically mining something if there's a lot of coarse gold around, because we see a lot of placer mining in this area, but this is up on the slope. So the entire slope had been extensively hydraulically mined. So it did a few things. It covered up most of the outcrop, and it was a mess. So I guess it deterred people from going over there in the past. I don't know. I can't speak to what their mandate was in the past, but certainly, when we saw these grades, we looked at it, we opened up the access, and we were pretty excited about the target. Anytime you get so many samples over an ounce, you're excited.
And talk me through the kind of it's just tell me the story, the bedtime story of how you found it. What was the process of getting geologists or sampling crews on that patch of ground?
Oh, I'm an old school geologist where I'm a systematic approach sort of guy. So when we got this project, and thankfully, Will and Paul are also cut from the same cloth, where we just throw the book at it, where we do detailed soil sampling, prospecting, mapping, geophysics over the whole project area. And I like to start with the geophysics. And the reason I do is because and I like my geologists to do it actually, because they're walking over everything. So when they see something, I want it flagged and I want it sampled. And that's really how we found this thing, basically just by having boots on the ground, walking over everything. There's outcrops, we flag them and we go sample them. And right now, aside from the beauty zone, out on the unpatented claims, we have over 20 exploration targets that are, similar sort of situation where we really just threw the book at this. We have someone walking across the ground on 50-meter centers, and that that makes a discovery. Back in the day, that used to be BHP's approach. They would just hire as many geologists as possible and have them walk lines, and eventually somebody's going to trip over a juicy boulder. So.
And that's what you've got at the moment. You've got crews walking lines effectively. And it looks pretty rugged terrain, but no bears, or maybe there are bears. Maybe take bear scarers, or
we haven't seen any animals here yet, surprisingly. And this is coming on our 3rd season there. So we get The biggest thing we have, if you have to drive from site into town into Salmon, Idaho, there's every different type of deer and elk and antelope on the road. But at the project area, other than a few mule deer, we don't see much. The guys have never seen a bear. I've never seen a bear there. And it is rugged in places, but certainly as you get to the north towards Granite Mountain. But the main project area is, part of the resources is up on a plateau, and the other part's down in the valley. It's not really. I wouldn't call it rugged by any stretch.
Well, it sounds as if it's a really interesting project area. So, how much of your budget is going to? How much are you going to be able to drill some of those other targets that you've generated? Can you just talk in terms of infill, expansion, and regional? Kind of what you're mentally thinking in terms of dividing up your drill program.
Yeah, so up till now, we've been a bit of a victim of permitting. So, waiting for our permits, but we're expecting to get our first set of permits for targets outside of the patent claims in April. And obviously we have the budget to drill. I have 27 holes planned there. That doesn't mean I'm going to drill 27 holes, but certainly could drill those initial holes. That's somewhere around 3,000 meters to initially test those targets. And then, up to, like I mentioned earlier, we're looking at somewhere around 10,000 meters of infill and resource expansion. And obviously, dependent on results as we go, labs these days are quite jammed and slow, but as we, like, if you remember that last diagram we had up where we're drilling the holes to the west and the east side of the deposit, when we get those results, obviously if we have something spectacular, we'll have the ability to follow up on those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you consider Beauty Zone to be expansion or regional?
Well, it's 500 meters from Lemhi. So, in my mind, I would love to think that it links up to Lemhi, but it's too early to tell. The geology definitely doesn't change between there and the Lemhi deposit, but as you get further from the edge of the intrusion, and as we call this an intrusion-related deposit, obviously you would think that the plumbing would get, the fluids have to travel farther along those structures. So whether that giant 200-meter package of mineralization it still exists over there, to be determined. But certainly, there's some spectacular vein sets there.
But Beauty is more distal than the main resource. To the intrusion.
It's 500 meters. It's 500 meters from the edge, from the western edge of the resource. So we're thinking of this as a satellite deposit right now that can add, that can quickly add ounces, because if we get anything like the grades on the surface, you're going to add a lot of ounces very quickly.
I noticed that in the marketing materials, and I think Will has spoken about it. Was it Randall? I'm sorry, but he's spoken about getting 1.5 to 2 million ounces in this program, which is quite a specific number. Starting from one, that's a half or a double.
Well, so as we did it, as I mentioned, back in 2016 when we identified this project, we knew there's some historic resources that were not 43-101 compliant that had somewhere around 800,000 to 1.2 million ounces. So we knew that we were going to get a starting point of around 800,000 ounces, and we just knew from the distribution of the drilling that there wasn't any reason. We didn't see any limits to the geology. We didn't see any hard cutoffs. We didn't see any reason that this couldn't be expanded outside of external targets like the Beauty Zone, because, like I mentioned before, nobody come in here and taken a regional approach to this and taken a large land package and tried to find another Lemhi. So we were excited about that potential, because, as this area with this area along the main, there's a main structure called the Trans-Challis Fault or structure, and it's pervasive in this area, and its cross structures for producing deposits like Revival has, like we have, like Midas, or it's not called Midas anymore, it's called Perpetua. Sorry. So we know this area is a good area to be in, and it's also usually rare. Like, well, you could use the analogy of Revival's deposit, where they have a series of deposits along the main structure. Well, we also have Lemhi sits along a main structure as well, a northeast trending structure, and that which happens to coalesce with the margin of the intrusion. So there's no reason that we don't have multiple deposits here.
So part of the work you're going to be doing is regional prospecting, regional mapping, Geology 101, look at the geophysics, try and get a repeat. And will you be using does the intrusion stand out on the geophysics? Have you got the regional geophysics along all your length of structure?
Yeah, we did detailed ground geophysics over the entire area. That was the first thing we did. We can see the contact of the intrusion, and then in places it outcrops as well. So we actually see the contact on one of the road cuts. So we could validate our geophysical surveys. We did some IP to test work over the deposit, which we have a number of IP targets which are going to be tested in this round of drilling. I really believe that the stratigraphy actually folds over on itself, and we're going to see a repeat in stratigraphy at depth. So I really think that there's a great chance that this deposit's wide open at depth, as well as to the east and the west. But I really think there's no reason. Nobody's ever proven that the deposit doesn't just keep going, because we get these at depth. You'll get these zones where you don't have any mineralization, and you come back into it when you come along one of these flat-lying structures. And I think that's going to happen again. I think we're going to see that, and we're going to test that in this project.
You've got a handle on the kind of the regional stratigraphy, so that you're able to say, hang on, we're into the overturned sediments here, or we've got this. Oh, I recognize this quartzite siltstone sequence, but it's inverted here. Are you familiar enough with the geology of the area to be able to start hanging things together?
Well, like I mentioned before, the deposit doesn't really seem to care whether it's in a siltite or a quartzite, and we really get a very strongly folded and sheared up system here of rocks. So knowing where you are exactly in the stratigraphy is pretty much impossible. They're just shattered, and the mineralization doesn't seem to be preferential to, it's not like a stratiform deposit where you're looking for one specific horizon in that metasediment package. It's just not that. It's whether these structures that the mineralization is on now are turned over, and now they just happen to be, slightly dipping. That's one theory. There's a number of theories, but certainly I don't see any reason why we just don't keep getting this layer cake of mineralization. Some of our holes at 200 and some meters ended in mineralization, so there's no reason that it doesn't keep going.
And so what you're essentially saying is the power or the driving of this fluid system, which is kind of overprinting and obliterating everything. I mean, you talked about the alteration in the sulfide zones. It's just obliterated by fluid flow and kind of repeat fluid flow. That's right,
and we see, as soon as if we when we drill, especially on the eastern margin of the deposit, where there's some sections where, and you can see the sections on our website. When you come through the intrusion, we always get at that contact, it's always mineralized, it's always cooked up. It's more so what we see away from the intrusion. So we know that thing it's for sure remobilizing mineralization, but it's obviously was the main heat source in the area. So it's a very important part of the deposit. And that's our land package, because we didn't have any competition at the time when we got it. We really were able to go to our ground geophysics and stake that entire contact with the intrusion. So we have some interesting targets in the north, being that there's not much outcrop in this area, that that we should be able to follow up on, and again possibly find another Lemhi.
And when you talk about intrusion, this is clearly, I'm just beginning to understand that this is a big intrusion. It runs for several kilometers. It's not a stock or a plug. It's a pluton.
It is a pluton for sure. Yeah, and it's interesting because it's mapped wrong on the Idaho geology map. It's mapped as volcanics, and it's not. It just isn't. So.
Cool. And the locator of the next Lemhi or Lemhi, I keep getting it wrong, I'm so sorry. Lemhi, is that structure, or is that a cross-cutting? Are you looking for kind of another cross-cutting fault which kind of localizes fluid flow, or is it just you've got to get up there and sample?
Well, both. And like I mentioned, because there's very little. Another reason people didn't do a lot of work in this area was because there's very little outcrop. There's about a 5 meter, very thin veneer of glacial till over the area, so there just isn't a lot of exposure. And as you know, the old timers were really good at finding anything that was exposed, but if it wasn't exposed, they didn't find it. So we're blanketing this whole area with soils to start with and geophysics. And when we have coincidental targets with at least more than 2 factors involved, then that becomes a pretty compelling target. And if you want, I can share my screen and quickly show you the magnetics.
Yeah.
And how it relates.
Does the geochemistry work through 5 meters of glacial till? And have you thought about getting an auger rig or to do some bottom of hole?
Yeah, we thought of that, but we obviously we used Lemhi as a test case. So we ran multiple different types of soil surveys because, back in the old days, you just did conventional soils and you took it for what it's worth. And we do get a bit of outwash in places and things which conventional soils just don't work. So with the advent of things like ionic leach and MMI, so we basically, again, we old school approach, just threw the book at it. We ran the lines over Lemhi because we obviously know we have a deposit there. And from that, we were able to see that ionic leach was the best match. And interestingly, Revival Gold came to the same conclusion at their project after us. So we were able to determine that was the best way to go. And then when we take our samples, so now we do ionic leach that sees through the glacial till, and it was much more reliable. Whereas what we saw in the conventional soils was very spotty response. And that would probably be from the presence of a little bit of coarse gold kicking around. And we know this was a historic placer area as well. So, you get a very large spike in one spot and then nothing over the middle part of the deposit. And whereas ionic leach really showed the margins of the deposit quite well.
Yeah, nice. So you're pulling up the geophysics.
Yeah. So can you see that?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
So this large discolored blob here, that's the intrusion.
Right.
You can see, and there's that outline that we talked about earlier, which is the Lemhi Gold deposit.
Yes.
This is the major structure that we've identified through the area, that northeast structure, which obviously mimics the trans-challis structure, which is the main regional structure through the area. And then when you get these cross structures, this is, there's a major cross structure, and I have the claims and things on here, so it's not completely apparent, but, believe me when I say that X marks the spot there. There's and it's old school stuff. What do you need to have a deposit? You need structure and you need a heat source. Those are the main things. And we obviously have these things. And as soon as you do the work, you see that they're very apparent. It's at the intersection of 2 major structures, and it's along the margin of the intrusion. So, so obviously things up here like target 5 and target 6, where you see, there's no reason to believe that's not another Lemhi.
Yeah.
We talked about all these different targets. So,
Dean, thank you so much. What a great story. I think I've got a much better picture for it. Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there anything else that you feel that we haven't covered that you want to kind of share?
No, I think it's going to be an exciting year for us. We're well financed. we're going to test all of our theories, whether it be exploration targets or expansion drilling at Lemhi. Obviously, there's the infill drilling, which we know and understand that already, but certainly going to be exciting times for things at the Beauty Zone and for our drilling at depth. If we were to get mineralization at either one of those, that's really going to make this an interesting story and really will get us close to that 2 million ounces quickly.
And do you have a feel for kind of the US retail? Are there US citizens who kind of seem to be interested in the story? Because I noticed you're listed in Canada. Maybe you don't. Maybe you spend too much time on the rocks and you're not listening.
I'm just the dumb geologist. I don't have anything to do with that side of the business. I'm just worrying about what the drill's doing and what the rocks are doing, and you'll have to talk to Paul and Will about those sorts of things.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I will do. But anyway, best of luck with it all. I like old school geology, especially where you can do it. I mean, there are the Mark 1 eyeball and a bit of boot leather and a hand lens and a hammer are pretty damn good tools.
Yeah, it works. And you know what? Don't try to think you're smarter than someone else. Just put the data in the archive file, blanket it with new data, and then see where you're at. And that's been our approach, and it's obviously working out pretty well so far. And I think it's going to continue to be exciting.